Chapter 1. A High Base. Dandelions stood amid the clouds, wafting their tufts to the winds in order to congest the respiratory system of every human they could reach. Perhaps intention was not present, yet presently the lungs of many folks resented the presence of the slight allergens, and with each cough, a wailing prostration to some otherworldly sentience, a microscopic god of the environment seeking vengeance upon the human elements of the world, was exuded. Each running nose an unsettled karmic debt being righted, every watery eye another sob for actions upending the delicate balance of powers and structures comprising the natural order of things. The dandelions grew, exploding out at their apex in all directions as though they knew the patterns of fireworks used over the Colorado River months earlier during the New Year celebration. The river knew, as well as the dandelions, that names were a necessary corruption, a construct that provides a recognizable order to those who need to make sense of a world that changes and flows like the waters of the river itself. The Colorado liked that the persons in this city referred to it with multiple names, Town Lake, Ladybird Lake, though it was no lake, or even by the bridges that crossed from one bank over to the other. Whereas other people in other cities might look at the residents of this city like they were as batty as the underside of the Congress Avenue Bridge most summer days, the residents of Austin accepted their own eccentricities with much more pleasant joy than they would have accepted the influx of people moving to their city each year. Alas, the demographics were changing, and the city was growing. The changes were taken in stride as long as they did not collide with the comfortable norms of local landmarks and cultural havens of human endeavors. But the postmodern tides rolled forward, and nothing could remain unchanged. As property prices soared, the locals became sore, and the quaint lunacy of the city seemed to be drained away for the quick financial forms of an ever-changing world. The festivals were not without controversy. Many small shops were starting to fold. The infrastructure was barely able to support the burgeoning population, and still many simply dug their heels in and insisted that they would remain as a soulful reminder of the human elements that were being rendered into mere fodder and cogs for the machinery of modernity, a tale as old as the market economy, voiced for as long as civilization has been. The dandelions grew, knowing that those who would want the picture-perfect lawn would seek ways to remove them. The superficial part of the world in which they function as simple dandelions do would sooner wipe them out and be free of the annoying reminder that the larger scope of life is much more than what is easily perceived and manipulated. The resilient little plants, ferociously referred to as weeds to provide the semblance that their very existence is illegal, carried on growing in the early morning light. Tiny insects folded their wings to avoid the radiant glow of the nuclear light in the sky. Various animals, nocturnal by natural selection, sought the cool, dark regions of their burrows under sheds and around trees. As the dawn broke, the dandelions stood tall and prepared for another round of declaring their unrelenting presence among the well-designed and exactingly executed planned forms of human social reality. Daring the humans to battle, their pollen wafted outward on the gentle winds. The air was not as acrid as it would become after a few hours of sunlight beat upon the ground. There was a genuine coolness surrounding Gary as he made his way toward the construction site. His bulky frame, muscular and top-heavy, moved with a reluctant grace toward the fenced-in area where he would gain a vantage most would be envious of, yet most were unaware existed. His hazel eyes blinked, casting his gaze along the street, functionally watching for the few cars of oncoming traffic as he crossed to the entrance of the site. Yet artistically, for lack of a better term, that he could sense yet not articulate for fear of losing his steadfast grip on the certainty that was required by his lofty station, he looked to accept the finality of this world from which he would soon ascend away. Gary ground together his back teeth in a subtle gesture of fear, releasing his anxiety as his brow locked into the immobile form that he used to convince himself and others of his confidence in his abilities. His black hair soaked up the slight traces of perspiration that accumulated under his helmet. He stood at the entranceway and inhaled deeply, pulling various and multiple pollen flecks into his nostrils with the precious oxygen his body sought. He felt only a faint tickle in his nasal passage and near the back of his throat. The assault the allergens brought upon him would have stunned other men, lesser men, men incapable of understanding what he understood and knowing what he knew. He demanded himself to be greater than the men who would have given way to fits of coughing, bleary-eyed men who would be blinded by their own tears in reaction to the environment through which they moved. He cleared his throat slightly and started looking up. "Don't," he commanded himself. He knew better than to let his glance wind up the structure. He winced that he almost looked, knowing what that would mean. He locked his eyes forward. Clearance was given earlier when he had arrived on site. The dark sky was foreboding, and he was glad to have the minutes granted to him to walk about the streets surrounding the site as the crew prepared the powerful loads for the scheduled work that day, and as day rolled into the heavens, casting light upon the world as far as he could see, he felt better than he did before. He knew it was only a matter of his perspective, but if he thought too much about that reality, his mind would slip into distraction, and that was a slip no person could afford. "Gary!" The foreman of the site, Jeff, shouted at him because of the 20 yards between them and not out of anger. When Gary looked at him, Jeff motioned with grand gesture to the radio in his hand so that his intended message would not be misunderstood. Gary quickly turned on the radio on his belt and gestured a thumbs up. "Lifting crew, report to north staging area." Jeff's voice rang through the radio. "Tower op is on site." "Morning, G." The voice of Raoul, supervisor of the lifting crew, coasted through the radio. "We're coming together for you." Gary smiled at the sound of his friend's voice. Clicking the radio, Gary spoke back with a deep yet soft voice. "Let's pull this project together for the city. And the paycheck," Raoul answered. Gary's smile faded. Walking closer to the tower, he put on his gloves and secured his harness on his body. Standing before the cat ladder, Gary connected the locks of his harness and then put his hand on a rung. For the city, for the paycheck, for the good, he thought, and then shut out all wanderings of his mental being, locked down all emotional turmoil and aspirations, and raised himself above the street level by simply lifting hand over hand and foot over foot along the striated rungs of the cat ladder. He was sure that, on some level, he was aware of how much time was passing, due to the slow lighting of the air by the nuclear fireball millions of miles away, and, once that thought was present in his mind, he stopped his climb and looked up to where the first platform was. Less than 20 feet away, he noticed the platform and reapplied his mental discipline to count off the rungs he was climbing to reach the platform. His breath, the friction of his hands within the gloves, and the repetitive placement of his work boots on each rung were the only thoughts he allowed himself to have. He glanced up and noticed the platform was within reach. He put all his focus onto his climb and carefully extracted himself from the collaborative grip between the cat ladder and he, and now he stood upon the first platform to rest and regain his composure. He let his guard down while he could, and the thoughts flooded in. With so little effort I am here, from the certification to the experience to the work, here as the part of this project each of the rest looks up to. They rely on me, as I would hope to be relied upon, and the entirety of the city does too. I can see past the highway now. What is a dividing line for most is just a line for me. 38, and with a view like this, I must have done some things right. Now, if I could convince Nadia about this, it would be so much easier. Don't take it to heart, man. Don't take it to heart. And if you do, try to remember, it is just hurtful because it is sweet of her. She knew what she was getting into when you married her. And she doesn't complain when you cover the bills and when you have the time off. She doesn't just want the help with Julia, baby girl, sweet daughter, reason beyond anything I could have predicted for what I'm doing here. She wants to have you around more. And sure, you leave before they are up in the morning, and you will get home after Julia is asleep, if not both of them. But they are insured, and the money is coming in. Nadia was hurt. I'm not around, sweetie, because of the work, which is good, and where I am needed to be, not just to pay for our home and family, but to be the man, the very being I know I am to be. This station, that perch above, it affords much more than salary. If there is cause to consider myself fulfilled, being daddy is essential, and husband is key, but this, he looked upward, this proves to me that I am more than I could ever seem to be. He looked at the ladder, and then to the surrounding area, but not down, as he was still too near to the ground, and would feel he was part of the happenings there. Time to let go of what may seem to be, and focus on what I am. He looked back to the ladder. They're waiting for me. He exhaled and rolled his neck to his left and right. He focused on his breathing, stretched his wrists and fingers, and then ran his palms along his legs, squatting slightly as he pressed firmly into his calves. He stood upright and rolled each of his ankles. He spoke before he began the next portion of the climb. Massage this weekend.